All right, my friends, welcome into episode 171 of the Leaning into Leadership podcast. My guest on the show today is Nicholas Bradford. Now, Nicholas is a lifelong educator with extensive experience working with challenging students both inside and outside of the classroom. He started his restorative justice education working in therapeutic settings. He's been in schools, after school programs, and in justice centers, and has really focused on putting together a comprehensive restorative justice framework. Nicholas is the co-author of the book, A Real-World Guide for Restorative Justice in Schools, and is the founder for the National Center for Restorative Justice. Nicholas and I sat down and had a really great conversation about what restorative practices really are, what they are not, and some of the best research-based best practices that we should be looking at in our schools, having that focus on relationships, having that focus on first response, and really making sure that we are taking care of our kids, helping them to repair the harm and not just simply face some type of punitive consequence. It's a really great conversation, folks. And I think if you have been looking at implementing restorative practices in your school, if you have been having those conversations about restorative justice within your district, within your community, or maybe you've already started those practices and just need a little bit of brushing up or something that maybe could allow you to sharpen the knife just a little bit, man, this conversation is you. You're going to love this conversation. It's absolutely fantastic. You get the whole thing right after this. Do you ever feel like you're the only one reading your school newsletter? Well, Smore is here to help you change that. Built for educators, Smore gives you hundreds of easy-to-use templates to craft newsletters your community will love and that they'll actually read. You can add videos, images, polls, and more. Stop guessing about what content your community wants to read. Use Smore's analytics to see who opens your emails and which links are getting clicked. And did I mention, Smore lets you translate your newsletter into more than 100 different languages. I'm telling you, this is the platform that you want to use. Sign up now and take $50 off your first year of your Smore plan. Make your newsletters easier and more engaging at smore.com/teachbetter. Again, that's smore.com/teachbetter. Hey, Leaning into Leadership listeners, it's Darren here, and I've got something really exciting to share with you. I've been working on something that I know is going to be a game changer for so many of you out there, especially if you're an early career principal or a school leader who's just feeling overwhelmed, unsure of where to focus your time, and just needing a little bit of clarity. I've spent years coaching school leaders and speaking at conferences across the country, and one of the biggest challenges I hear all the time is this: how do I prioritize my leadership actions when I get constantly pulled in 100 different directions? Now, if that sounds like you, I've got some great news. I am launching a brand new digital course designed specifically to help early career school leaders take control of their time, focus on what truly matters, and lead with clarity and purpose. In this course, Take Control of Your Leadership, a Road to Awesome map for early career leaders, will give you the tools and strategies to overcome overwhelm and set you up for long-term success. And here's where it gets really exciting. We are officially in pre-launch mode. You'll have a chance to get early access. I'll be releasing more details over the next few weeks, but here's what you need to know right now. Get over to roadtoawesome.net and sign up for our mailing list. As a subscriber, you'll get exclusive early bird pricing, plus some extra bonuses that I'll be sharing really soon, and you don't want to miss that. In the meantime, keep tuning in to the Leaning into Leadership podcast, because I'll continue to be sharing more tips, strategies, and course updates in the coming weeks. I can't wait to take this journey with you and to help you lean into your leadership in an even bigger way. Now, thank you for listening. Let's get to today's episode. So I want to go in a little bit different direction with today. episode. We're going to talk about restorative practices, and we have on the show today Nicholas Bradford, who is the director of the National Center for Restorative Justice. And we're going to talk about restorative practices. We're going to talk about the work that they do at the National Center for Restorative Practices. But just before we hit the record button, I was telling Nicholas this, that one of the things that I do, one of the neat things that I get to do is I teach a course at Fort Hays State University, a graduate level course, and it's an advanced classroom management course. And one of the pieces that we do in that particular course, one of the books that I focus on, is Nathan Maynard and Brad Weinstein's Hacking School Discipline, which I think is an absolutely phenomenal text. And this episode, so for my Fort Hays State University students who eventually will listen to this episode, because I think we're going to use it for the course, make sure you're paying attention and you take good notes. For everybody else, I'm just super excited to welcome Nicholas Bradford into the Leaning into Leadership podcast. Full disclosure, folks, we've actually recorded this episode once before. Audio didn't work. We're doing it again, which means it's going to be even better. So, Nicholas, welcome into the show.
Thanks, Darren. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just take a minute or two to orient our audience a little bit about who Nicholas Bradford is, maybe share a little bit of your background, maybe where you're coming from, some of that type of stuff, so people understand a little bit more about you before we dive into our conversation.
Yeah, I'll give the semi-brief version. I was a teacher in Vermont, and at that time, I was working with young people with some behavioral challenges in a non-traditional school setting. I ended up volunteering for a community organization in the evenings, working with some young people who had charges in the community. And it made a ton of sense to me, like quickly, like making connections between the work that we were doing around accountability, repair, understanding the impact, doing that kind of work with minors who have a charge, theft, reckless driving, leaving the scene of an accident or something, so stuff like that. Kind of bigger stuff than what we were dealing with in the classroom and in the school, but at the same time, the work was really connected, and so seeing sometimes in alternative settings, we have young people come and we focus, primarily on relationships, and that's essential. And then, but we forget about the accountability. We forget about like why they might be there. Sometimes they're there because like the traditional school setting isn't for them, and sometimes they're there because they've blown out. They've done a lot of like harmful things to the community and or teachers. And so, I think a mixed bag. That was really like the start of it for me. I met two really powerful like national leaders, John Kitta and internationally Dominic Barter from Brazil. Really got excited about the work. I came back to Washington State. That's kind of where I grew up. And yeah, I got a master's in education policy in 2012 and been doing consulting work ever since. And in 2016, we founded the National Center for Restorative Justice. In 2021, we published our book, A Real World Guide to Restorative Justice. So, in the sense of plug-in books, there we go. And yeah, been doing this work ever since. And our work is primarily focused on schools and education. And I also think that a big part of me is there's two other additional parts that I like to mention. Is one, I spent 24 years in the Coast Guard Reserve, been deployed a bunch, doing like interesting things. Was a law enforcement officer for a couple times there, but doing a lot of search and rescue type mission work. And I learned a lot of things in the Coast Guard that has helped me communicate this work to folks who maybe are less excited about the terms or have heard some negative things about restorative justice. So there's that part. And the other part is I'm a dad. I've got a 3.5-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. And this work is really personal to me as well. So like the restorative work, the relational work, it's also how do I do this in my home with my kids? How do I help them at the same time not hurt each other, but also give them freedom, give them understanding? And what does accountability look like for a 3.5-year-old looks very different than a 16-year-old. And that's been largely my experience. My experience as an educator was in high schools, and then having little kids, it's like, okay, this is a different thing, but it's also not. And so this work has been really personal and sort of embodying like who I am. So
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and I appreciate a lot of that backstory. Well, I appreciate all of the backstory, but in particular, a couple of pieces that really kind of stand out, and that's not just the working with students, but also that application as a parent and understanding that it isn't just this is what I do when I'm at work, right? That this is something that I want to embody, and also just the opportunities that you've had to work with people at both a national and international level to really sharpen that focus and to sharpen that saw. So I think I want to begin here. I think this is something that is a question I hear periodically from folks, probably not near as frequently as maybe you do, but give us a good, maybe street level, classroom level definition. What does restorative justice really mean? Because I think it's something that certainly it's a term that gets thrown around a lot, but in many cases it gets thrown around quite inaccurately. So let's hear it from the author of the book. What is restorative justice?
yeah. So first of all, the way I approach it and the way I talk about it isn't the right way. But I agree. There's a lot of narrative out there that is really inaccurate, really unhelpful to understanding the work that we're doing. So the definition that we use is it's a relational approach to conflict. And this is like, it's essential that we recognize that restorative justice has a reputation totally of being permissive, of being passive, of being like not engaged. And I think that that's a fault of either narration, sort of how we talk about it, or a fault of implementation. So for sure, there are folks out there who are getting it wrong. Um, but it's the opposite of the passive. And so I want to like kind of think about permissive and punitive as both being passive in a different way, right? So like when young people get into trouble and they're punished, right? And whether it's at home and it's timeouts, or it's go to your room, or it's you're on restriction for a week, which I've been grounded before, right? Or in classrooms in schools where it's go to the office, suspensions, detentions. And a detention, when kids are just sitting in the room for an hour like staring at a wall, like that's a passive experience. Even corporal punishment, families or schools, corporal punishment is it's a passive experience. Kids just get their licks and they go back to playing, they go back to doing what they were doing, and there isn't a real learning that happens. And so think about that as passive. Think about the punitive systems as passive. And then also think about permissive systems as passive, right? Giving a lot of support to kids, understanding where they're coming from, and working with young people who have really scary, really traumatic, really kind of heartbreaking stories. And then they come in, make a threat to somebody, turn over a desk, like yell at a teacher, fight in the school, solve their problem with violence. And then we're like, oh man, Nicholas, like that's a real sad story. Like I understand why that might be your go-to behavior because family circumstances, community circumstances, whatever it is. We're not doing them any favors either. So the passivity is both, whether it's punitive or permissive. Like that's an experience. And so the restorative approach is really around how do we get kids in action? How do we like activate both the accountability and the action of repair? Those two things are essential for restorative justice to work well, is the active nature of it. And to some degree, that's a slow process because kids will slow walk it and they don't want to do it and they don't want to participate. And like we have to have really clear boundaries and stuff like that. So there's a lot there around like what restorative justice is, but I will go back to the beginning, which is a relational approach to conflict. How are we doing both of those things at the same time, being in relationship and engaging in a conflict at the same time? That's the hard work. And yeah, unfortunately, I'm really trying to be real that this isn't easy work, but it's worth it. when we invest the time and energy into young people and adults to really engage and develop skills around conflict, that can really be helpful. So that's the short version.
No, no, I think that's excellent. I really do, and I think I really appreciate that definition. And I honestly really appreciate you taking us down the road there with having both, the punitive path and also the permissive path as being passive. I really like how you define those and share those for us. I've said it many times. People who listen to the podcast repeatedly have probably heard me say it many times. Back in my days as an assistant principal and in our work of really changing the culture of our school, we had to move away from just simply focusing on punishment to gain compliance. And listening to you talk about the punitive and the permissive, to me, there's a big difference here between what our goal is with punishment or consequence versus this permissive, this reteach. Let's maybe go a little further there, because I'm sure you hear objections when you do trainings in schools or with parents or community groups, whatever. I'm sure you hear pushback, and there's a big difference between punishment and consequences and repair and restoring the harm. So maybe talk a little bit about that piece.
Yeah, there's two places that we struggle, and sometimes they're both at the same time, but oftentimes it's not often, but it's these two places. It's accountability and the work of repair. And so young people get really good at stonewalling us. And you've asked kids this question before too, right? Like, hey, what happened? I saw something at the playground, or, let's look at this video. Tell me what happened. And the kid will just like stare at you, stonewall you. I don't know, right? They'll give you the I don't know card, or sometimes if they're sort of more socialized, they'll give you the I'm sorry card, right? And we like just accept that for some reason. Like, this is an okay thing to like, and then we tell them and teach them, and you're like in middle school, even 5th and 6th grade, kids are like, I don't know. And you're like, no, I saw you. I know exactly what happened. And so we need to slow down that process. And this is the challenge for sure with schools, is that we're go. And there's a lot of harm that's happening in schools. So we have to sort of slow down and sit with kids and be like, hey, let me know when you're ready to have this conversation. And I did this with my son just like 2 days ago. Again, I do this all the time with him, but he was being, rude or not listening or something like that. And I can't remember exactly what it was, but I was like, hey man, like, let's sit on the couch. And we sit on the couch, and our process is like, tell me what's going on. And he's like, I don't want to talk about it. I'm like, cool. All right. You can sit on the couch as long as you want until you're ready to talk about it. But how we get off the couch is by talking about it. And so, if a kid like does something in science class with a Bunsen burner, right, in high school, like really dangerous and like inappropriate and like really awesome, and we go to ask, and he says, oh, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. Like, that's a problem. Like, no, let's slow down. Like, first recognize and say out loud what it is that you did, especially for middle school and high school kids, because they have a lot of intellectual like a lot of brain capacity to actually do that. So that's the first step, and we got to make sure we're doing that better. But then around the sort of consequences or punishments, it's like, I mean, sometimes it's a little bit of like pick your poison, young person, like young kid, like, what do you want to do in order to make things better? That's the question I often ask, is like, how do we make things better? How do we move forward from here? And that has to be real tangible work. I'm just trying to think about some good examples of kids. Like, a colleague of ours had a middle schooler she lit her bathroom pass on fire in the bathroom. And then, step 1 was light the bathroom pass on fire. Step 2 was, I'm not sure. She throws it into the garbage can. And obviously in the bathroom, there's a bunch of paper in the garbage can, lights on fire, kind of starts a big deal. Nothing serious happened. They evacuate the building. They come in, they, put out the fire. And so she was suspended for a little while. I can't remember what the total suspension time was, but on her return, they had a conference and they were like, hey, well, how do we make things better? And one of the challenges that we have in our school and in policy, and this is where we have to sort of think about how we change policy, is the confidentiality, like stuff that we're really wrapped around the axle on. And it totally makes sense. And they're wrong. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody knows who did it. Everybody knows like what happened. And so we actually need to make it a little bit public, her apology, her recognition that she really messed up, so that she can sort of start to remake her reputation in the school away from being a little dirtbag who started a fire in the bathroom to somebody who's caring and compassionate about the school. So she went around and, she wrote a letter to the school, to all the adults, but she also went around and checked all the emergency evacuation plans in every room. And it was a public thing. So she'd go in with an adult, check and make sure that, Mr. Jones had his and Mrs. Smith had hers. And so kids saw it. And the seeing of the action of apology can be really helpful. And people feel like sometimes that's not enough. And I get it. And if it's changing behavior and she's learning from that, that's what we want. We don't want punishment for punishment's sake. We want consequences for learning opportunities.
Yeah, no, that's really powerful right there. Consequences for learning opportunities. And even in that example, so student sets the bathroom on fire, and yes, there's a restorative element here. There were still consequences. You said she was suspended for a period of time.
Yeah.
I think that's sometimes a misconception that people have, that if we're going to use restorative practices, if we're going to use restorative justice, that means we don't have the consequence piece sitting over here. But those two things not only can, but should live in harmony. Is that accurate?
Yeah, totally. Like we all have these fights with kids, right? In middle school, you're like, is it a real fight or is it a pushy shovey fight? Right? And you're like, all right, the pushy shovey stuff, like we're not going to suspend a kid for that, even though maybe by policy we should or could. Like those kind of things, we're going to do a restorative conference in lieu of suspension. Whereas knockdown, drag out, kid knocks a tooth out, blood on the basketball court. Okay, yeah, those kids are going home, and then we're going to reassess how we bring them back and have a restorative conference and have parents in, and maybe have some community members and mentors kind of supporting that conference. And so the scale we continue to have the sort of exclusionary policies, but it's in service of a restorative conference. It's in service of maybe some time and space. I had these two guys in a middle school, and it was like kind of pushy shovey stuff. They were friends, but they weren't listening to the adults saying, hey, two eighth graders like shoves his friend into the lockers. Boom, on the outside of this classroom, the science teacher comes out, says, hey guys, what's going on? And they're like, nothing, and they run off, right? Like, I'm not going to suspend a kid for that, but this isn't the first time, and we need to tell them this is a bigger deal. So we sort of have a conference. There's some, 3 or 4 hours in school suspension to have this conversation with their RJ coordinator. So there are these sort of what we would consider traditional exclusionary policies or approaches, but it's in service of relationship. It's in service of repair. It's in service of like letting kids really think about what is it they're doing. And just my example, like my 3.5-year-old, right? Like he didn't want to talk about it. Cool. But yeah, you're still sitting on the couch. Yeah. And it was literally like a minute and a half. He's like, okay, Dad, I'm ready to talk about it. Great. All right, let's talk about it. So it really is like the time is proportionate to their willingness to engage in the conversation. And when they are, sometimes, super serious things, we want to have more time. But most of the time, it's just dependent on them and their willingness.
Right. So here's where I want to go with this. And I kind of opened with this, and no, this isn't just something I want to record for my students at Fort Hays State, but great bonus for my students at Fort Hays State. They get to listen to my voice. That's not the bonus. You are the bonus. And so this is where I want to go with this. So not only for them as pre-service, or in many cases, they're in the classroom, they're in year 1, year 2, year 3, still going through their alternative licensure. for them, in addition to, you know, other classroom teachers who might be listening and are wondering, what are some steps I can take in my classroom, whether this is a building wide focus or not? What are some things I can do to kind of lean into some restorative practices to assist with my classroom management and ensure that my students are in a safe learning environment?
Yeah. What we typically think about is like non-evaluative language. Like this is the first lowest level interaction that we can have with a kid. So much of our work as educators, as teachers in the classroom, is like telling kids over and over and over again, hey, put your phone away. Hey, put your phone away. Hey, get your book out. Get your book out. Hey, we're on page 17. Like, I need you to do the thing. Like, let's do the thing now. Okay, let's do the thing. So we need to stop narrating what to do and just observe what it is that they're doing. That's, typically we're going to observe things that are not like in line with expectations. So this is as the middle school. These are guys are like sixth or seventh grade. I can't remember. And I walk over. I'm observing a substitute teacher, a long-term sub, and I go over. I'm like, "Hey guys, I just noticed that you're putting your hands all over each other." They were messing around and like trying to get something. One kid was trying to get something from the kid, and they tell me like, "Oh, this whole story about this candy and this bag of raisinets that they had, and like they were sharing it, but he wants the last bits back." And it was a whole thing. But in the observation of the behavior, they told me a whole lot of things that were going on. And so, if kids coming in late, hey, Nicholas, I noticed you were in to class late. And they might tell you, yeah, I had to drop off my kid, or yeah, I was working the morning shift at McDonald's, or yeah, I was doing this and that, or yeah, the police came to my house last night and there was a lot of stuff going on and my dad got arrested. And you're like, oh, cool. Like that kind of stuff. I'm like, yeah, fine. That totally makes sense. Or it's, I had to walk my girlfriend to her class. Okay, cool. And then I just say, what are the expectations? Allowing them the opportunity to say it out loud it's just essential work. They have to say it out loud. And my colleague, Sarah, I got to give credit where it's credit where credit's due. Is she says all the time, like, what we fire, we wire. When young people say out loud, this is what the expectations are. Whether it's being in the class on time or keeping my hands to myself or swearing or whatever it is, they're doing the work. And I think what gets exhausting about classroom management for us as adults is that we're doing 98% of the work. And kids are saying, yeah, okay, all right. What do I have to say in order to get you to leave me alone? And what it should be is you got to just remind me about the expectations so that you're saying it out loud. When you think about goal setting and mission oriented organizations, like say it out loud over and over. You got a goal to study more, read more, wake up earlier, write it down, see it every morning, right? See that goal every morning on your mirror. That's how you sort of start to inculcate the habit. And how we help young people do that is we just ask them a question. Hey, what's the expectation? Hey, what's the expectation? What's the expectation? With an observation and before that, which is, whatever is coming class late or whatever. And we can really relax because the small behaviors aren't about me, right? The small behaviors of like them talking to each other. Of course you want to talk to your friend. Of course you do. Totally makes sense. What are the kids doing here right now? Are they working on, or it's silent reading, or we're moving to small groups or whatever. Okay, cool. And then stop talking and then move away. That's the sort of first introduction of like real engaging, but not making it like a fight or a power struggle.
Yeah. Oh, that's outstanding right there. Now let's bounce it up to the next level. Okay, so I'm a school administrator who's listening to this conversation, and I want to see this happening across my campus. What might be some steps that I take as a school leader so that we can begin to even just take those baby steps into restorative practices in our school?
Yeah, send a team to one of our trainings, and then bring that learning back to your school. Like that's our goal, is like that lots of people come from all over the country to our trainings, and then they bring it back to the school. And that's the hope. That's the implementation, because we're never going to train enough people individually. But yeah, I mean, there is a little bit of like, you got to look at your data. You got to like see where your problems are at. Are they big problems or small problems? Most of the time, they're low to medium level problems. That's the sort of the lion's share of what we're dealing with. Most schools don't have a lot of like serious fights. They don't have a lot of drug selling or use on campus. Use might be different than like drug selling and stuff like that. But you got to look at your data and see, do we have good relationships here? What's our climate feel like? Do kids feel like they belong? If kids don't feel like they belong, they're more likely to hurt each other, right? I say this all the time, which is the reason why we do relationship building circles in our classroom, is because we're less likely to hurt people that we know, and even more less likely to hurt people that we care about. When I was in high school, I went to a very large high school, 2,400 students, and I would go into classrooms where I would look for one of my like 5 to 10 friends. And if I didn't know them, I would just sit and keep my mouth shut and try to be under the radar. And that enabled me, I didn't do this, right? But it enables me, or people like me, to be rude to each other, to be mean to each other. And that's why the internet is such a toxic place, is because we don't know or care about other people. And so if we want schools to be a place of compassion, we have to know each other and then start to care about each other. So it really, I mean, for me, I don't tell people how to sort of start. I give a lot of tools and say, hey, what makes sense for y'all? Like, does it make sense for more relationship building? Does it make more sense for, you know, reentry conferences? So some alternative programs, we have a lot of kind of kids coming in for some bigger stuff, some more serious kind of violence or something like that. Right. Let's like focus on reentry conferences. Let's like talk about how to reduce the number of the length of time that kids are suspended, but bringing them back in a careful, kind way with some actions of repair. Like that's might be a place where that school is going to start, but a different school might be thinking about, what's our recess look like, and how do we get kids to be more kind and safe at recess? Great, let's do that. Let's do some accountability circles, some low level, big group kind of stuff. So, I mean, it really is looking at where your problems are, where your big like challenges of data are, and then what your resources are. Like, you have people like, who's going to do this work. So you have a school psychologist who's going to run circles. You have a couple deans that are in their internship, and you've got a good relationship with the university, and so you've got a couple extra administrators, and they can do some more relationship building. For sort of conferences for that kind of bigger stuff. Yeah. So then that's where we sort of ask those questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you referenced it, so let's go ahead and go there too. I mean, certainly coming to some of your trainings would be definitely something that people should be considering. I know you have offices or branches in Kansas City. You also have one in the Northwest. I think you just mentioned that it's now in Portland. Talk a little bit more about the National Center for Restorative Justice and the work that you do.
So the lion's share of our work is with K-12 public education institutions. And we start off with like a 3-day in-person training that gives a lot of foundation for the practices. We also have some online curriculum that folks can jump into, and a community that's growing and building to support those schools. We have a bunch of resources that after you come to our trainings, you can get copies of our workbook forms, PowerPoint. And so like the design is that you come to the 3-day, and then you bring that back and you train your staff, and you've got some implementation opportunities or some consulting opportunities with us to really do that. And then we have 2 additional trainings if you want to come back and do more. We talk about, trauma-informed practice. My wife's a psychologist, so it kind of comes through a lot in and around the trauma work. And she supports us there. We do a little bit more equity work in our like 2nd-tier training. And then we're looking at facilitation and how do we facilitate, and getting some reps in really is like at bats of what's a conference look like? How do we do this better? And then again, that third level is once a year, sort of toward the end of the school year, where we're working with young people to bring those young people to support the trainings. Um, and yeah, that'll be new this coming spring. Um, and yeah, so we do a bunch of traveling too. Obviously, we've offered trainings. We've offered a standalone 3-day training for folks in all over the Midwest, and then we'll go out for like a day or two. To most of our schools that we go to have had us out or have had people out to our trainings first, and so they get an understanding of like what we're talking about and our messaging, and then we're more likely to find the time to head out there. So, and we travel internationally. We're going to Seoul, Korea, and Laos at the end of September, and that we're super excited about that. International schools haven't again had come here to Seattle, done some interesting. Did the 3-day training, excited about that, and wanted us back out. So that's kind of the model. And if folks have attended our trainings and want some more support, then we'll go out for a day or even a half day, depending on budgets and things like that. So
Yeah, outstanding. So a whole lot of really, really good stuff there, Nicholas. We've reached the point in the show where I'm going to ask you the same question I ask everybody here on the podcast. So it's the Leaning Into Leadership podcast. So tell me some things, Nicholas, that you're doing to lead into leadership.
yeah, I think leadership's a funny thing. We think a lot about sort of positional leadership, but then there's the behavioral practices and how do we. We're a very small organization. Um, so it is a little bit about how do I lead this organization, and also how do I help folks be helpful, productive leaders of a team. And the things that come up for me, obviously relationship building work, but there's 3 things that I learn and I kind of continue to reference um, from my time in the Coast Guard experience and with a bunch of other guys from the military. My uncle's 25 years in the Green Berets, and we talk about this a little bit sometimes. The one is mission-oriented organizations are much more likely to be successful if we can say our mission over and over and over again. And in the Coast Guard, we're lucky because it really is like pulling people out of the water, jumping into the big waves and like pulling people out. So it's easy for us to see our mission on a regular basis and do the grunt work to achieve that mission. And for educators, I think we need to talk about it more. We need to say what it is that we're doing more readily. One of my first Coast Guard leaders actually was, because I was in the reserves. He also had a day job. He was a special ed teacher in the Olympia School District, and he had above his door carved I don't know what it was, but it was like the little motto for the school. And every day, kids leaving his classroom would touch that stone above his door. And just as a reminder of like, hey, this is what we're here for. Hey, this is what we're here for. This is what we're. And if it is educational excellence for everyone, like that's a real like life-saving mission. And we just need to be more real about that and talk about it more. And so that's mission-oriented organizations are more successful, more likely to achieve the outcomes that they're seeking. Invest in people. I think investing in time and energy in people and not believing that we can fire our way, whether it's adults or suspend our way to a good community, right? Because I work with classrooms across the board in very affluent, very nice, quote unquote, private schools, areas of town or whatever. And I work with schools that are really, really challenging and really struggling with some stuff. And it's like they all have problems. And so the idea that we're going to get rid of, this kid or that kid and be like, oh, my life will be so much easier. No, it's just going to be different. And so we need to be real about our unwillingness to let kids go. We really need to think about how do we invest in people. And the third thing is team cohesion beats technical expertise every time. And we, at the National Center, we're a dispersed team. And so that's a challenge for us. And how do we do that? And how do we have, meetings, and how do we have on-sites that are like connecting us? That's our issue. But, schools issues are the same, right? Like schools are set up with classroom teachers in every classroom, and there's not a lot of time to actually like collaborate and be a team and see that I am passing off these kids to that teacher, and I need to know that they're going to be there for me. And you saw it in the Olympics this summer, actually, like where the Team USA basketball team with like some of the best players in the world were struggling against Serbia. And no shade on Serbia, right? But like they had their act together. They knew where they were at because they've been playing together for much, much longer than Team USA. And if you got a bunch of all-stars, it's hard for them to pass the ball. It's harder for them to like trust other people. I got this. I'm going to carry the team on my shoulders kind of attitude. Nobody wants that. And it doesn't like bode well for team performance. And so those are the kind of three things that I go back to all the time is unit cohesion beats technology expertise every time. Mission-oriented organizations are more successful and more likely to achieve the outcomes that they're looking for. And we need to invest in people, both young people and the people that we work with.
It's excellent stuff. I really appreciate all of those. Really speaking right into my core right now with especially with the team stuff, because that's an area that I've been really deeply focused, and as most who listen to the podcast regularly know, that's an area that I'm starting to do a lot more research, a lot more work, and actually working on a book in that specific area. So really appreciate a lot of what you just shared right there. Nicholas, people are going to want to get in touch with you. They're going to want to know more about the National Center for Restorative Justice. How do they get in touch with you? How do they find the center?
Yeah, so we're easy to find. It's nationalcenterforrestorativejustice.com. It's a long one. Or nc4rj.com is also, we'll get you there. You can find me on LinkedIn mostly. We do have a Facebook presence, but it's not up very often. And yeah, those are the big places. But reach out and join us for a training, or have us out to happy to send a team to offer a 2 or 3 day training for folks if they're new.
Yeah, outstanding. We'll make sure all that stuff is down there in the show notes for folks to get in touch with you. Nicholas Bradford, thank you for joining me here on the Leaning into Leadership podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron.
All right. Once again, a big thank you to Nicholas Bradford and the National Center for Restorative Justice for joining me here on the Leaning into Leadership podcast. Awesome conversation. Thank you so much, Nicholas. And folks, get down there, hit the links in the show notes, pick up a copy of the book, and check out the National Center for Restorative Justice. And now it's time for a pep talk. So over the last couple of weeks, I have been in a lot of schools, working with a lot of leaders. I've been so swamped that I actually missed a midweek release this past week. So my apologies, folks, if you were looking for me on Wednesday and saying, hey, where's Darren? Sorry, Darren was busy. And Darren was wrapped up in schools the last couple of weeks. And the reason that I say that is for the pep talk. What I discovered and what I saw working with leaders over the last couple of weeks is you're exhausted, you're tired, and you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed. And so I wanted to just take a moment to give you a second to pause a little bit, to give you a second to just take a breath, to remind you that it's important to get up on that balcony, to take a look around, and don't lose sight of the things that are truly important. The urgent, the immediate, the crisis, not every single one of those is what's most important. Now, I'm not saying you don't need to deal with things. I totally understand that. But what I want to remind you is it's so important for you to remain clear on what matters. If you don't remain clear, there's no way your staff is going to remain clear. And we know what happens when we remove clarity from the classroom. That's when we start to see poor performance from students, poor performance from our teachers. We've got to maintain that clarity. We've got to make sure that we stay focused on the things that really matter. So take that time, take that break. If you haven't gone and stood on the balcony, you've heard me talk about the balcony on here a lot. If you haven't gone and stood on the balcony, go do that. Take the time, check in on yourself, remind yourself what you really care about, remind yourself what you're really focusing on, what you're trying to accomplish, and then be intentional with your time and with your actions this coming week. If you need help with that, just reach out. Send me an email, send me a direct message, hit me up on social media. Just reach out. Let's have a conversation. Let me be there to support you. Because, folks, leadership can be a very, very lonely space, but it doesn't have to be. You don't have to be isolated. Make sure you get connected. And again, you heard the ad at the beginning. The Take Control of Your Leadership course is coming very soon. If you're not already on our email list, make sure you get over to roadtoawesome.net. Get signed up, because you're going to start seeing a whole bunch of information starting to come rolling out anytime on that course. Thank you so much, folks, for joining me here on the Leaning Into Leadership podcast. Leaders, you've got this. You can do this. And get out there and have a road to awesome week.